They say blood is thicker than water, but in the viper's nest of noble houses, loyalty was a currency more easily spent than gold. I, Alexander Vale, learned that lesson the hard way, betrayed by my own kin, my family name dragged through the mud, my beloved sister murdered before my eyes. To get my revenge, I had to become stronger first, and my power needed to be second to none. In the end, it happened just as I wished, after 2.5 years as a mercenary. I accumulated countless fame, honor, and wealth. People called me the king of mercenaries. But just when I was ready to return home and have my vengeance, I was ambushed. I died a disgraced, powerless fool. But death, it seems, had other plans. Reborn into the past, with the bitter taste of failure still fresh on my tongue, I have to rewrite history. This time the game board is set, but I know every player's hand, every hidden trap, every treacherous move. This time, House Vale will rise, and my enemies will learn what it truly means to face a strategist reborn. The fall of House Vale wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing descent into ruin, orchestrated by enemies both within and without. And I, Alexander Vale, the spoiled, reckless heir, played my part in that downfall with a breathtaking level of incompetence. I was, to put it mildly, a disappointment. While my father, Duke William Vale, a stern but ultimately honorable man, burdened himself with the responsibilities of ruling our lands, I indulged in every pleasure the capital city had to offer. Wine, women, gambling, I excelled at them all, much to the chagrin of my family and the delight of our rivals. House Belmont, led by the ruthless and ambitious Duke Armand Belmont, had been our rivals for generations. Their lands bordered ours, their ambitions mirrored ours, and their hatred for House Vale burned with a cold, unwavering intensity. Belmont was a master strategist, a patient schemer, and he saw in my recklessness an opportunity to weaken our house from within. He didn't act alone, of course. He had allies, puppets dancing on strings of gold and promises. My own cousin, Cedric Vale, was one such puppet. Cedric, with his charming smile and his venomous whispers, was a viper in our midst. He craved power, resented my position as heir, and saw Belmont as a means to achieve his ambitions. And then there was Amelia Greystone, my betrothed. Beautiful, intelligent, and utterly devoid of scruples, Amelia was a master manipulator, playing the game of courtly intrigue with a skill that even Belmont admired. She'd been promised to me as a political alliance, a merging of two powerful houses, but her loyalty lay not with House Vale, but with her own ambitions, and those ambitions aligned perfectly with Belmont's. The whispers started subtly. Rumors of my incompetence, my debauchery, my unsuitability as heir. They spread through the court like wildfire, fueled by Cedric's carefully planted lies and Amelia's subtle manipulations. My father, bless his heart, tried to intervene. He reprimanded me, lectured me, even threatened to disinherit me. But I, in my youthful arrogance, dismissed his concerns. I was young, I was powerful, I was invincible. Or so I thought. "Alexander," he said, his voice weary, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and concern, "you are playing a dangerous game. Your behavior reflects poorly on our house, and it emboldens our enemies." "Father, you worry too much," I replied, waving my hand dismissively. "I'm just enjoying myself. Let Belmont and the others whisper. They're just jealous of our power." He sighed, a deep, resigned sigh that I would later come to understand as the sound of a father's heartbreak. "Power is a fragile thing, Alexander," he said, "and it can be lost far more easily than it is gained." My sister Eleanor was the only one who truly understood the danger. She was younger than me by 2 years, but she possessed a wisdom and a maturity that I sorely lacked. She was kind, intelligent, and fiercely loyal to our family. And she loved me, despite my flaws, despite my recklessness, despite my utter disregard for her warnings. "Alexander," she said, her voice filled with concern, You need to be careful. Cedric is not your friend. And Amelia, she doesn't love you. She's using you." I laughed, a dismissive, arrogant laugh. "Eleanor, you worry too much. Cedric is family. And Amelia, well, she's my betrothed. Of course she cares for me." "She cares for power, Alexander," Eleanor insisted. "And she'll do anything to get it. Please, be careful." I patted her hand, a condescending gesture that I would later come to regret with every fiber of my being. "Don't worry about me, little sister," I said. "I can handle myself." My arrogance blinded me. I ignored the warnings, dismissed the whispers, and continued down my path of self-destruction. And in doing so, I paved the way for House Vale's downfall. There was a crucial battle, a border skirmish with Belmont's forces. My father, trusting in my supposed military training, which consisted mostly of drunken brawls and staged demonstrations, put me in command of a significant portion of our troops. I, of course, botched it spectacularly. I was overconfident, reckless, and utterly unprepared for the realities of warfare. I led my men into a trap, a carefully orchestrated ambush that decimated our forces and resulted in a humiliating defeat. That battle was the turning point. It shattered our military strength, emboldened our enemies, and destroyed my father's faith in me. "You have disgraced our house, Alexander," he said, his voice cold, his eyes filled with a disappointment that cut me deeper than any blade. "You have proven yourself unworthy of your inheritance." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't. I knew he was right. I had failed. I had failed my family, my house, myself. From that point on, the decline was swift and brutal. Belmont pressed his advantage, launching a full-scale invasion of our lands. Cedric, revealing his true colors, openly sided with Belmont, betraying our family and leading Belmont's forces through our defenses. Amelia, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned me, aligning herself with the winning side. Her betrayal, though expected, still stung. It was a final, brutal confirmation of my own stupidity, my own blindness. The day everything ended began like any other. A feast, a misguided effort by my father to restore some morale. A perfect trap. It was during a festival, a seemingly joyous occasion meant to celebrate the harvest. But the joy was a facade, a thin veil masking the fear and desperation that gripped our house. Eleanor, as always, saw through the charade. "Alexander," she said, taking my hand, her eyes filled with a premonition of doom. "I don't like this. Something feels wrong." "It's just a festival, Eleanor," I said, forcing a smile. "Try to relax. Enjoy yourself." "Please be careful," she pleaded. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," I said, a lie that would haunt me for eternity. And then the attack came. It was swift, brutal, and perfectly executed. Belmont's assassins, disguised as festival-goers, infiltrated the crowd, their daggers hidden beneath their cloaks. Their target was Eleanor. I saw it happen in slow motion, a nightmare unfolding before my very eyes. A flash of steel, a scream, a crimson stain blooming on Eleanor's white dress. I tried to reach her, to protect her, but I was too late. She fell, her body crumpling to the ground, her eyes staring up at me, filled with a mixture of pain, fear, and disappointment. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her hand reaching out for mine. I held her, cradling her broken body in my arms, my tears mixing with her blood. I felt her life slip away, her warmth fading, her light extinguished. And then the world went dark. I was captured, dragged before Duke Belmont, who stood there gloating, his eyes filled with a triumphant malice. "You were a fool, Alexander Vale," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A weak, pathetic fool, and now your house is mine." I had doomed my family. I had failed to protect my sister. I deserved to die, and I did. A traitor's death, alone and defeated, ambushed before I can taste vengeance. The world swam back into focus with a nauseating lurch. I was lying in my bed, my ridiculously oversized feather-stuffed bed, in my lavishly appointed chambers in the Vale ancestral castle. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a scene of almost obscene normalcy. My head throbbed, a dull ache that was nothing compared to the searing agony of my death. My death, the memory of it, the cold steel, Eleanor's lifeless eyes, Belmont's triumphant sneer. It slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I sat up, my body trembling, my hands clenching the silk sheets. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory of a life I had lived, a life I had squandered, a life that had ended in utter, catastrophic failure. I looked around the room, taking in the familiar details, the hunting trophies on the walls, the overflowing bookshelves, the carelessly discarded clothes strewn across the floor. It was my room, the room of Alexander Vale, the spoiled, reckless heir, but it felt alien, wrong. I stumbled to the mirror, my legs shaky, my heart pounding. The face that stared back at me was young, too young. Smooth, unlined, with a hint of youthful arrogance that made my stomach churn. It was the face of the fool I once was, the fool who had doomed his family. The calendar on the wall confirmed the impossible. It was 100 days before the border skirmish, the battle where I'd made my disastrous tactical blunder, the battle that had started the domino effect of our ruin. 100 days before Eleanor. A wave of grief, so intense it almost buckled my knees, washed over me, but I pushed it down, forced it aside. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now, not yet. "This time," I whispered, my voice raspy, my reflection's eyes hardening with a newfound resolve. "I will not be the fool they take me for." It was a vow, a promise to myself, to Eleanor, to my family. I had been given a second chance, a gift so improbable, so impossible, that it bordered on the miraculous. And I wouldn't waste it. I immediately began to assess my situation. I was in my younger body, yes, but I had the mind, the knowledge, the experience of my older self. I knew the key players: Belmont, Cedric, Amelia, their strengths, their weaknesses, their treacherous plans. I knew the timeline, the events that would unfold, the mistakes I had made. The first few days were a carefully orchestrated performance. I had to maintain the facade, to play the part of the spoiled, irresponsible heir that everyone expected. To deviate too drastically, too quickly, would arouse suspicion, alert my enemies. So I went through the motions. I attended the tedious council meetings, feigning boredom and disinterest. I sparred half-heartedly with the master-at-arms, making sure to lose spectacularly. I flirted with the court ladies, drank too much wine, and generally behaved like the entitled, carefree young lord I was supposed to be. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. I started training secretly, rigorously. I rose before dawn, sneaking out of the castle to a secluded training ground I'd used as a boy. I pushed my body to its limits, honing my swordsmanship, practicing my rudimentary and long-forgotten magic skills, and studying military strategy with a focus I'd never possessed before. I even began practicing simple spells I vaguely remembered. I also started observing, really observing. I watched my father, noticing the subtle signs of stress, the worry lines etched around his eyes, the way he favored his injured leg. An old war wound, I now remembered, that Belmont's forces had exploited. I watched Cedric, my treacherous cousin, noting the way he fawned over my father, the sly glances he exchanged with Amelia, the subtle ways he undermined my position. I watched Amelia, my betrothed, seeing through her charming facade, recognizing the cold ambition in her eyes, the calculated cruelty that lay beneath her beautiful exterior. And I watched the servants, the guards, the courtiers, the countless individuals who made up the intricate tapestry of House Vale. I looked for allies, for potential weaknesses, for any advantage I could find. One person in particular caught my attention: Belinda. She was my personal maid, a young woman, a few years older, who'd been assigned to me since I was a child. She was quiet, efficient, and fiercely loyal. She'd always been there, a silent, almost invisible presence in my life. In my past life, I'd barely noticed her, taking her service for granted. But now I saw her differently. I saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength in her demeanor, the subtle signs of disapproval she couldn't quite hide whenever I acted the part of the spoiled heir. One evening, after a particularly frustrating training session, I returned to my chambers to find Belinda laying out my clothes for the night. "You're pushing yourself too hard, my lord," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You'll injure yourself." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and I made a decision. "Belinda," I said, my voice low, "we need to talk." I told her, not everything, of course, not the truth about my rebirth, about my knowledge of the future. That would have been too much, too unbelievable. But I told her enough. I told her about my concerns, about my suspicions regarding Cedric and Amelia, about my determination to change things, to protect our house. She listened, her expression initially skeptical, then slowly shifting to understanding. And then to belief. "I've always known something wasn't right, my lord," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I've seen things, heard things, things that didn't make sense, but I didn't know who to trust." "You can trust me, Belinda," I said, my voice sincere. "I need your help. I need your loyalty." She met my gaze, her eyes filled with a fierce determination that mirrored my own. "You have it, my lord," she said. "Always." And with those words, my first alliance was forged, a bond of trust, of loyalty, of shared purpose. Belinda became my confidant, my spy, my eyes and ears within the castle. She was the first piece in my carefully constructed plan, the first step towards reclaiming my destiny. The game had begun, and this time, I was playing to win. Not for power, not for glory, but for survival, for redemption, for Eleanor. The annual Harvest Festival. In my past life, it had been a day of celebration, of feasting and merriment. A day that ended in tragedy. This time, it would be different. I knew, with a sickening certainty, exactly how it would unfold. The assassins, disguised as festival-goers, would strike during the evening fireworks display. Eleanor, separated from the main crowd, would be an easy target. A quick, clean kill, made to look like an accident. I wouldn't let it happen. I shadowed Eleanor throughout the day, maintaining a discreet distance, but always keeping her within sight. I played the part of the bored, slightly drunk heir, feigning disinterest in the festivities, while my senses were on high alert, scanning the crowd, searching for any sign of danger. Belinda, my ever-loyal confidant, was my eyes and ears within the castle, monitoring Cedric and Amelia, ensuring they remained oblivious to my plans. "They suspect nothing, my lord," she reported, her voice a hushed whisper as I met her briefly in a secluded alcove. "They believe you are still the same unobservant fool you once were." "Good," I replied, my voice grim. "Let them underestimate me. It will make their downfall all the sweeter." The hours crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension, the dread, the certainty of what was to come. I saw Eleanor laughing, dancing, enjoying the festivities, her face radiant with a youthful innocence that made my heart ache. She was so vibrant, so full of life, and I was determined to protect that life at any cost. As dusk settled and the crowds gathered for the fireworks display, I positioned myself strategically near the secluded garden path where I knew Eleanor would be lured. I'd already disabled the faulty lantern that in my past life had provided the assassins with cover. I'd also discreetly alerted a few trusted guards, planting the seed of suspicion about a potential attack by rival houses. And then they came. Two men dressed in the garb of festival workers, their faces obscured by shadows, approached Eleanor, their movements swift and purposeful. I saw the glint of steel, the flash of a drawn dagger. I moved. I intercepted them before they could reach her, my body a shield between my sister and her would-be assassins. "Eleanor, run!" I shouted, my voice ringing out over the growing roar of the crowd. The assassins, surprised by my intervention, hesitated for a moment. That moment was all I needed. I drew my own sword, a blade I'd been secretly practicing with for weeks, and engaged them in combat. I was no master swordsman, not yet, but I was driven by a fury, a desperation, that gave me an edge. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. I managed to disarm one of the assassins, wounding him severely. The other, seeing his companion fall, fled into the crowd. Eleanor, her face pale with terror, stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Alexander, what happened?" she stammered. "It's all right, Eleanor," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "You're safe now." The guards arrived, alerted by the commotion. I quickly explained the situation, pointing to the wounded assassin and the discarded daggers. I subtly hinted at the involvement of rival houses, planting the seed of suspicion against House Belmont. The incident caused a sensation. The festival was disrupted, the whispers spread like wildfire, and the security around House Vale was tightened. But more importantly, Eleanor was alive. I had changed fate. I had saved her. And I had also, inadvertently, created an opportunity. The attack and my subsequent heroism had raised my profile, made me a figure of interest, of respect. I used that newfound respect to my advantage. I needed allies, powerful allies, and I knew exactly where to find them. The Cerberus mercenaries. A legendary company known for their skill, their ruthlessness, and their independence. They were expensive, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. They were also, in my past life, a key factor in House Vale's downfall, hired by Belmont to sow chaos and weaken our defenses. This time, they would be mine. I knew from my past life that their leader, Julius Renard, was a man of complex motivations. He wasn't driven solely by gold or by loyalty, but by a deep-seated desire for recognition. He craved respect, legitimacy, a place in the annals of history. He also secretly harbored a deep resentment towards House Belmont for a past slight that had cost him dearly. I sought him out, not in some shadowy tavern or hidden camp, but in the open, at a prestigious military tournament. I approached him boldly, publicly, knowing that my reputation, however tarnished by my past, would precede me. "Julius Renard," I said, my voice clear and confident as I approached his encampment. "I am Alexander Vale, and I have a proposition for you." He was a mountain of a man, scarred and battle-hardened, with eyes that could freeze the blood in your veins. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "The Vale whelp," he said, his voice a gravelly growl. "What could you possibly offer the Cerberus mercenaries?" "An opportunity," I replied, my voice unwavering. "An opportunity for profit, for glory, and for revenge." I laid out my plan, a carefully crafted proposal that appealed to his ambition, his resentment, and his desire for recognition. I offered him not just gold, but a chance to rewrite history, to become a legend, to stand beside House Vale as an ally, not an enemy. "You speak of revenge, boy," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Against whom?" "Against House Belmont," I replied, my voice cold and hard. "Against the man who betrayed my family, who murdered my sister, who stole my future." I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew. He knew the truth of my words, the depth of my hatred. "And what makes you think I would betray my current employers?" he asked, testing me. "Because I know your secret, Renard," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I know about your sister, the one Belmont's physicians failed to save. I know about your oath of vengeance, and I know that you're a man of your word." He stared at me, his face a mask of surprise, then anger, then a grudging respect. "You're a dangerous young man, Alexander Vale," he said finally, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And I like that." And with those words, the alliance was forged. The Cerberus mercenaries, the most feared fighting force in the land, were now my allies. But I needed more than just muscle. I need resources. I need power. And I knew just where to find it. The Monster Forest, a vast, untamed wilderness bordering our lands filled with dangerous creatures and, more importantly, rare magical crystals. These crystals, in my past life, had been the key to House Belmont's technological advancements, their military superiority, their wealth. I knew their location, their properties, their potential. I proposed an expedition to the Monster Forest, ostensibly to secure our borders and protect our lands. My father, still wary of my judgment, was hesitant. But with the support of Belinda and with the backing of the Cerberus mercenaries, I convinced him. "This is a risk, Alexander," he said, his voice filled with concern. "A dangerous undertaking." "It's a calculated risk, Father," I replied, "and the potential rewards are immeasurable." And so, with a company of hand-picked soldiers and the elite warriors of the Cerberus mercenaries at my side, I ventured into the Monster Forest, not as a reckless young heir seeking adventure, but as a strategist, a leader, a man with a plan to secure the resources I needed to build my power, to protect my family, and to ultimately crush my enemies. The game was escalating, and I was finally ready to play. With Eleanor safe and the Cerberus mercenaries secured, it was time to deal with the internal threats. The snakes in the grass. Cedric and Amelia. Cedric first. My cousin was a weasel, a creature of pure ambition and zero loyalty. He craved power, but he lacked the spine to seize it directly. He preferred to work in the shadows, whispering poison, manipulating others, and always looking out for his own self-interest. Killing him would have been easy, too easy, and it would have made him a martyr, a victim of my supposed ruthlessness. I needed to remove him, yes, but in a way that wouldn't create further instability within House Vale. I decided on a frame job, a carefully orchestrated scenario that would expose Cedric's incompetence, his greed, but not his outright treachery. I used my growing network of contacts, and a hefty bribe to a particularly corrupt scribe, to forge a series of documents, letters, contracts, financial records that implicated Cedric in a scheme to embezzle funds from the House Vale treasury. Not a huge sum, mind you, but enough to damage his reputation, to make him a liability. I then accidentally discovered these documents, presenting them to my father with a carefully calibrated mixture of shock and disappointment. "Father," I said, my voice trembling with feigned emotion, I don't know how to say this, but I found something disturbing. Something about Cedric." I laid out the forged evidence, watching as my father's face turned from surprise to anger to a deep, bone-weary sadness. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice shaking. "My own nephew, stealing from his own family." "I know, Father," I said, my voice sympathetic. "It's heartbreaking. But we can't ignore this. We have to do something." The something, of course, was exile. A public shaming, a stripping of titles and privileges, but not death. Cedric was banished from House Vale, stripped of his inheritance, and sent to live in disgrace in a remote backwater province. He was removed from the game board, neutralized, but not martyred. Amelia was a more complex challenge. She was cunning, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. A direct confrontation would be too risky. I needed to be more subtle. My strategy was to make her position untenable, to force her to choose between her ambition and her survival. I started by subtly undermining her family's finances. A few well-placed rumors, a few strategically timed investments, and the Greystone fortune began to dwindle. I made sure the whispers reached Amelia's ears, letting her know that her family's security, her social standing was precarious. Then I introduced a rival. A beautiful, charming, and wealthy young woman from a neighboring house. A woman who, on the surface, seemed the perfect match for the reformed Alexander Vale. I made sure Amelia saw us together, laughing, talking, dancing at courtly events. I even, subtly, encouraged the rumors of a potential alliance between our houses. The effect was predictable. Amelia, driven by jealousy and fear, became increasingly desperate. She tried to rekindle my supposed affection, using all her feminine wiles, all her carefully practiced charm. "Alexander, darling," she purred one evening as she cornered me at a courtly gathering. "You've been so distant lately. Have I done something to offend you?" "Not at all, Amelia," I replied, my voice cool and detached. "I've just been busy with matters of state." "But surely you have time for your betrothed," she insisted, placing a hand on my arm, her touch possessive. "We have so much to plan. The wedding, the future." "The future is uncertain, Amelia," I said, my gaze meeting hers. "And my priorities have shifted." I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the fear of losing her grip on power, on the life she craved. "Alexander," she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "don't do this. Don't abandon me." "I'm not abandoning you, Amelia," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I'm simply reevaluating our arrangement in light of recent events." I let the words hang in the air, a veiled threat, a subtle reminder of her precarious position. She had a choice to make: flee and save herself, or stay and risk exposure and ruin. I, frankly, didn't care which she chose, as long as she was out of my life, out of my family's way. My father, however, was a more difficult challenge. He'd witnessed my transformation, my newfound competence, my ruthlessness. He was grateful, yes, for my actions in saving Eleanor, in securing the alliance with the Cerberus mercenaries, in stabilizing our house's finances. But he was also wary. He sensed a change in me, a darkness that he couldn't quite understand. "Alexander," he said one evening as we were reviewing the latest reports from the border skirmishes, "you've changed. You're stronger, more decisive, but also more ruthless." "I've had to be, father," I replied, my voice weary, "to protect our family, to survive." "But at what cost, Alexander?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "What are you becoming?" It was a fair question, a question I'd been asking myself. Had I gone too far? Had I become the very thing I despised? "I'm becoming what's necessary, father," I replied, my voice firm. "I'm becoming the leader House Vale needs, the leader we deserve." "And what about mercy, Alexander?" he asked. "Compassion? Justice?" "Justice will be served, father," I said. "But mercy is a luxury we can't afford. Not right now, not with our enemies circling." I knew I was walking a fine line. I was using my knowledge of the future, my ruthless tactics, to achieve a greater good. But I was also, perhaps, losing a part of myself in the process. The innocent, idealistic boy I once was gone, replaced by a hardened, cynical strategist. "I understand, son," my father said, sighing, "but don't lose yourself in the process. Don't become the very thing you're fighting against." His words were a warning, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, of the corrupting influence of ambition. And I, Alexander Vale, the reborn strategist, would do well to heed them. The game was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. I had to be vigilant, ruthless, and perhaps a little bit afraid. Afraid of becoming the monster I was fighting. Money, I'd learned in my past life, was a weapon as potent as any sword or spell. And in this second chance, I intended to wield it with ruthless precision. My knowledge of future economic trends was my ultimate advantage, a crystal ball that allowed me to predict market fluctuations, invest in emerging industries, and short-sell companies destined for collapse. The Cerberus mercenaries, while primarily a fighting force, also proved invaluable in this arena. Their reputation, their network of contacts, their discreet methods opened doors that would have otherwise remained closed. I started by targeting the corrupt merchants who had, in my past life, profited from House Vale's downfall. I knew their weaknesses, their illegal dealings, their hidden vulnerabilities. One, for instance, a fat, greedy merchant named Lord Barrows, had made a fortune smuggling contraband goods through our territories. I used my knowledge of his activities, along with a few strategically placed anonymous tips to the authorities, to bring him down. "Lord Barrows," I said, confronting him in his opulent but now threatened mansion, "it seems you've been careless. Your illegal activities have come to light." He paled, his jowls quivering. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," I replied, my voice cold and hard. "I have proof, Barrows. Enough to see you imprisoned, your assets seized, your reputation ruined." He tried to bluster, to deny, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was caught. What do you want?" he stammered. "I want what you stole from my family," I said. "And I want interest." I offered him a deal. He would donate a significant portion of his ill-gotten gains to House Vale in exchange for my silence. It was blackmail, pure and simple, but it was also justice of a sort. I repeated this pattern with other corrupt merchants, other nobles who had profited from our misfortune. I used my knowledge, my connections, and a healthy dose of ruthlessness to reclaim what was rightfully ours and to build a financial foundation that would be unshakable. But money wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full extent of the conspiracy that had destroyed my family. I needed to uncover the truth, to identify all those involved, to make them pay. I started digging, delving into the past, piecing together the fragments of information I had gathered. I revisited old haunts, spoke to former servants, even sought out some of my old enemies, the ones who had survived my previous life's downfall. One such encounter was with a disgraced former knight, Ser Kalen, a man who had once been a loyal servant of House Vale, but had betrayed us for Belmont gold. He was living in squalor, a shadow of his former self, consumed by guilt and regret. You're Alexander Vale," he said, his voice trembling as I found him in a dingy tavern. "But you're different." "I remember you, Kalen," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I remember your betrayal." He flinched, his eyes filled with shame. I was a fool," he whispered. "I was seduced by Belmont's promises. I didn't know. I didn't understand." "You chose gold over loyalty," I said, my voice hardening, "and you paid the price." "I have," he agreed, his voice barely audible. "I've lost everything, my honor, my reputation, my life." I studied him for a moment, seeing not just a traitor, but a broken man, a victim of his own weakness, and I realized that he could be useful. "Tell me everything, Kalen," I said, my voice softening slightly. "Tell me everything you know about Belmont's plans, about Cedric's involvement, about Eleanor's death." He hesitated, then with a sigh of resignation, he began to speak. He told me about the secret meetings, the coded messages, the bribes, the assassinations. He revealed the full extent of Belmont's treachery, the depth of Cedric's betrayal, and the chilling details of Eleanor's murder. His words were like daggers, twisting in my gut, reopening old wounds. But they were also clarifying. They confirmed my suspicions, filled in the gaps in my knowledge, and strengthened my resolve. The pieces were falling into place. I was building a case, not just against Belmont and Cedric, but against the entire corrupt system that had allowed them to flourish. And my father, Duke William, was starting to notice. He'd observed my actions, my successes, my transformation. He'd seen the way I handled the merchants, the way I dealt with Cedric, the way I was quietly, efficiently rebuilding our house's fortunes. He summoned me to his study one evening. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the fireplace, casting long shadows on the walls. "Alexander," he said, his voice grave, "I need to know what you're doing. I see the changes, the results, but I don't understand your methods." I hesitated. How much could I reveal? How much should I reveal? I'm protecting our family, Father, I said, carefully choosing my words. I'm doing what's necessary to ensure our survival, our future. And what about honor, Alexander? He asked, his eyes searching mine. What about justice? Justice will be served, Father, I replied, my voice firm. But sometimes, justice requires unconventional methods. I told him some of what I'd learned, about Belmont's long-standing conspiracy, about Cedric's treachery, about the threat that still loomed over our house. I didn't reveal everything, of course. I didn't mention my past life, my knowledge of the future. That would have been too much. But I told him enough. Enough to convince him that I was acting in our best interests, that my methods, however ruthless, were justified. He listened, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. You've changed, Alexander, he said finally, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and concern. You're not the boy you once were. No, Father, I agreed. I'm not. He nodded slowly, then stood up, walking towards me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. I trust you, Alexander, he said. I trust your judgment, and I will support you in whatever you need to do to protect our family, to secure our future. His words were a validation, a confirmation of my new role, my new purpose. I was no longer the disgraced heir, the reckless fool. I was the protector, the strategist, the savior of House Vale. And I would not fail. Not this time. My father had finally placed his faith in me. I would make sure that it was well placed this time. The drums of war, which had been a distant rumble, now thundered in our ears. The orcish tribes, long contained within the borders of the Blighted Lands, had grown restless, their raids more frequent, their attacks more brazen. The Emperor had called for a subjugation force, a coalition of noble houses tasked with quelling the threat. In my past life, this had been another nail in House Vale's coffin, a costly and ultimately futile endeavor that further depleted our resources. This time I saw it as an opportunity. Father, I volunteer to lead our forces, I declared at the War Council, my voice ringing with a confidence I hadn't possessed in my previous life. The other nobles, including some who still saw me as the feckless youth, exchanged surprised glances. My father, however, merely nodded, his eyes betraying a glimmer of hope. He'd entrusted me with more and more responsibility, and I hadn't disappointed him. Very well, Alexander, he said, his voice firm. You shall have your chance. But know this, the fate of our house, and perhaps the entire realm, rests upon your shoulders. I spent weeks preparing, poring over maps, studying the orcs' tactics, and drilling my troops relentlessly. I knew from my past life the key weaknesses of the orcish war machine, their reliance on brute force, their lack of discipline, their vulnerability to flanking maneuvers. I also implemented a series of unconventional strategies. I armed my scouts with modified crossbows that fired alchemically treated bolts, capable of igniting the orcs' flammable war paint. I trained my cavalry in hit-and-run tactics, designed to harass and disorient the enemy. I even, with the help of Mr. Howard and his contraptions, devised a series of traps and fortifications that would turn the battlefield to our advantage. The battle itself was a stark contrast to my previous disastrous encounter with the orcs. This time, I was in control. I anticipated their every move, countered their every attack, and led my troops with a calm, decisive authority that inspired confidence and obedience. We lured the main orcish force into a narrow valley, where our archers rained down fire upon them, while our cavalry harassed their flanks. The alchemically treated bolts ignited their war paint, causing panic and chaos in their ranks. And when they finally charged, they ran headlong into our carefully prepared fortifications, a maze of trenches, barricades, and deadly traps. The battle was a rout. The orcish army was decimated, their leadership shattered, their threat neutralized. And House Vale, under my command, had achieved a decisive victory with minimal losses. News of our triumph spread like wildfire, bolstering our reputation and silencing my critics. I returned to the capital a hero, hailed as a brilliant strategist and a courageous leader. The spoiled heir had vanished, replaced by a formidable warrior, a cunning tactician, a man to be reckoned with. But even as I savored this victory, I knew that the true battle was yet to come. The internal threat, the conspiracy orchestrated by House Belmont, was still festering, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And strike they did, taking advantage of the chaos and distraction caused by the orcish threat. A rogue faction within the Imperial Guard, secretly funded and armed by Belmont, attempted a coup. They seized control of key strategic points within the capital, intending to overthrow the Emperor and install a puppet regime loyal to Belmont. But they had underestimated me. I'd anticipated this move. My network of spies, cultivated over the past months, had alerted me to the plot. Belinda, my ever-loyal confidant, had even infiltrated the ranks of the conspirators, providing me with invaluable intelligence. While the city descended into chaos, I acted swiftly and decisively. I rallied my loyal troops, secured the support of the Cerberus mercenaries, and launched a counterattack. The fighting was fierce and brutal, a desperate struggle for control of the capital. But my troops were better prepared, better equipped, and better led. We retook the strategic points one by one, pushing the rebels back, cornering them, and ultimately crushing their rebellion. The coup failed, and in its failure, the full extent of Belmont's treachery was revealed. We found evidence, letters, contracts, witnesses that irrefutably linked him to the rebellion, to the orcish incursions, and to the assassination attempt on Eleanor. The time had come to end this. I presented my evidence to the Emperor, a just and honorable man who had, until now, been blinded by Belmont's carefully crafted facade of loyalty. The Emperor, shocked and enraged by the scale of Belmont's betrayal, ordered his immediate arrest. What followed was not a quiet, behind-closed-doors affair. I wanted a public spectacle, a demonstration of House Vale's power and Belmont's utter ruin. I demanded a trial by combat. It was a risky move, a gamble. Belmont was a skilled warrior, experienced and ruthless. But I was confident. I'd trained relentlessly, honing my skills, preparing for this moment. And I had something Belmont didn't have, the burning fire of righteous vengeance. The arena was packed, the crowd a sea of faces, their eyes fixed on the two figures standing in the center. Alexander Vale, the reborn strategist, and Duke Armand Belmont, the fallen schemer. "You have disgraced your house, Belmont," I said, my voice ringing out across the arena. "You have betrayed your emperor, and you have conspired against my family. Today, you will pay the price." Belmont sneered, his eyes filled with hatred. "You are a fool, Vale," he spat. "A boy playing at being a man. You will die here today, just like your pathetic sister." The mention of Eleanor's name ignited a fury within me, a cold, controlled rage that fueled my every move. The fight was brutal and unforgiving. Belmont fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, his attacks relentless, his movements precise. But I was faster, stronger, and more determined. I parried his blows, dodged his attacks, and slowly, relentlessly, wore him down. Finally, I saw my opening. A slight hesitation, a flicker of fatigue in his eyes. I lunged, my sword flashing, and struck. Belmont staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief, as my blade pierced his armor, drawing blood. He tried to fight back, but it was too late. I disarmed him, my sword point pressed against his throat. The crowd was silent, holding their breath, waiting for the final blow. But I hesitated. I looked at Belmont, at the defeated, broken man before me, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness. Killing him wouldn't bring Eleanor back. It wouldn't erase the pain, the loss, the betrayal. "Get up," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. Belmont stared at me, his eyes filled with confusion. "I said get up," I repeated. "This isn't over." He slowly, painfully rose to his feet. "Your crimes are many, Belmont," I said, my voice ringing out across the arena. "Treason, conspiracy, murder. But I will not stoop to your level. I will not become a butcher. I will let the Emperor decide your fate." And with those words, I sheathed my sword, turning my back on my defeated enemy. Belmont was stripped of his titles, his lands, his wealth. He was banished from the realm, his name forever stained with dishonor. House Belmont, once a powerful rival, was shattered, its influence broken, its future uncertain. And House Vale, under my leadership, stood triumphant. The game was won. The past was avenged, and the future was ours. The fool had become the strategist, and the strategist had won. The dust settled. Belmont was banished, Cedric exiled, the rebellion crushed, and the orcish threat neutralized. House Vale stood stronger than ever, its enemies scattered, its future secured. But there was one loose end remaining: Amelia Greystone. She'd played her part in the grand game of betrayal, a pawn in the hands of others, but also a willing participant in the schemes against my family. With Belmont gone, her position was precarious. She'd lost her protector, her patron, her path to power. I knew she wouldn't simply disappear. She was too ambitious, too proud, too desperate. She'd make one last desperate play. And I was right. I received a message, a secret summons to a secluded meeting place. It was unsigned, but I knew who it was from. Amelia. I went, of course. Not alone. Belinda, ever vigilant, shadowed me, along with a detachment of the Cerberus mercenaries, discreetly positioned nearby. I wasn't taking any chances. The meeting place was an abandoned temple, a relic of a forgotten age, its stones crumbling, its gods long dead. It was a fitting location for a final confrontation. Amelia was waiting for me, dressed in a simple, unadorned gown, her usual elaborate jewelry conspicuously absent. She looked defeated, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Alexander," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I needed to see you." "What is it, Amelia?" I asked, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. I made a mistake," she said, her eyes pleading. "I was foolish. I was manipulated. I never meant to hurt you, to hurt your family." "You aligned yourself with our enemies, Amelia," I said, my voice hardening. "You participated in their schemes. You knew about Eleanor. You did nothing to stop it." She flinched, her face paling. I was afraid," she whispered. "Belmont, he threatened me. He said he would—" "He would what?" I challenged. "Ruin your family? Disgrace you?" "He already did that, Amelia, and you helped him." She started to cry, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Alexander," she begged. "I'm begging you. Give me another chance. I can help you. I know things. Secrets." I looked at her, at the beautiful, manipulative woman who had once been my betrothed, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just emptiness. "There are no second chances, Amelia," I said, my voice flat. "Not for this." I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to save herself, to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. She was offering to betray Belmont, to provide me with information, to become my ally. But I didn't need her. I didn't trust her, and I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "You have a choice, Amelia," I said, my voice firm. "You can face the consequences of your actions. You can stand trial, answer for your crimes, and accept whatever punishment the Emperor deems fit." Her eyes widened in fear. But that means prison," I finished for her. "Or worse, or," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "you can disappear. You can leave this realm, start a new life somewhere far away from here. Somewhere where no one knows your name, your past, your crimes." She stared at me, her tears slowing, her expression shifting from fear to calculation. She was weighing her options, assessing the odds. "And if I choose to disappear?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "I will provide you with the means," I said. "Enough gold to start a new life. a safe passage to a distant land, and I will forget you ever existed. It was a generous offer, more generous than she deserved, but I wanted her gone, out of my life, out of my family's life, forever. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. I accept, she whispered. I'll leave. I'll disappear. And with those words, she sealed her fate. She chose exile, anonymity, a life lived in the shadows. It was a far cry from the power and prestige she'd craved, but it was better than the alternative. With Amelia dealt with, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. My father, Duke William, seeing my transformation, my leadership, my unwavering commitment to House Vale, finally, fully, acknowledged my worth. The ceremony was held in the great hall of the Vale Castle, the same hall where I'd once been a disgraced, rebellious heir. Now I stood tall, proud, my head held high, surrounded by my loyal allies, my supportive family, and the cheering crowds of our people. I, William of House Vale, hereby name my son Alexander Vale as my rightful heir, my father declared, his voice ringing with pride and emotion. He has proven himself a worthy leader, a skilled strategist, and a true protector of our house. Long may he reign. The crowd roared its approval, their cheers echoing through the hall. I felt a surge of satisfaction, not the empty, fleeting satisfaction of youthful indulgence, but the deep, profound satisfaction of a hard-won victory, of a destiny reclaimed. Eleanor, standing beside me, squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. I knew you could do it, Alexander, she whispered. I always knew. We did it, Eleanor, I replied, smiling. Together. After the ceremony, I stood on the balcony of the castle, looking out over our lands, the lands I was now sworn to protect. The scars of the past were still visible, the damaged fields, the ruined villages, the lingering fear in the eyes of our people. But there was also hope. The fields were being replanted, the villages rebuilt, and the fear was slowly being replaced by a newfound confidence, a belief in a better future. I had kept my promise. I had saved my family, avenged my sister, and secured our future. I had risen from the ashes of my past life, transformed from a feckless fool into a respected leader. But the journey had changed me. It had hardened me, yes, but it had also taught me the true meaning of loyalty, of courage, of love. I knew that the challenges ahead would be many. The empire was still fragile, the threats still real, but I was ready. I was prepared. I was no longer the boy who had stumbled blindly into disaster. I was Alexander Vale, the reborn strategist. And this time, I would not fail. This time, House Vale would not just survive, it would thrive. And it would do so under my leadership, guided by my vision, protected by my strength. The game had been reset, and I had won. Not just for myself, but for everyone who depended on me, and that, in the end, was a victory worth fighting for.